Right guys, we're going to try something new today. We're going to have a bit of fun here. We are going to do an episode of Boxing Gossip Mythbusters, which could potentially be a new recurring segment on the channel. Let's see what the reaction is to this video. As the fight has got closer, and I am of course referring to Kell versus Golovkin, more and more people are picking Kell to win. When the fight was initially announced, I think we were really struggling to find anyone giving Kell a chance. Now, as the fight got closer, as the hype has builded, as Eddie Hearn and Kell have been talking and selling and building the hype, more and more people are coming up with angles as to where Kell could have some superiority in this fight. And I think there's a lot of nonsense flying around in the build-up to this fight. So in this video, I am going to try and debunk 8 particular myths that are relating to this fight that I have heard bandied around in the last few days. And these are common conceptions that seem to be held by certain boxing fans and certain figures within boxing. These are not niche myths that I've picked out of thin air. So stick with me here. We're going to go through 8 separate myths, 8 separate nonsensical suggestions that I have heard relating to why Kell is going to win this fight. So let's break it down. Let's start with myth number 1. Kell is a massive guy. The size difference isn't really going to be there. Now, I have always said Gennady Golovkin is not the biggest middleweight out there. Golovkin is a guy who potentially, maybe could make light middleweight if the circumstances were completely right. And because of that, I will acknowledge that the size difference here is not as vast as the average welterweight versus the average middleweight. Nevertheless, the size difference here is still very, very relevant. I think a lot of boxing fans don't fully understand what is meant by a size difference. Kell is, if you look at him now, when he's fighting at middleweight, he's got thicker legs, he's got bigger biceps, he is potentially carrying a bit more body fat on him, which is no bad thing whatsoever, but he's potentially not quite as low on body fat as he was when he was making 147. So yeah, I guess in one sense, Kell is a bigger guy. He's got bigger arms, he's got a bigger chest, he's got bigger legs. But that is actually not really what hardcore boxing fans mean when they talk about the size of boxers. Put simply, anyone, and I'm not suggesting Kell has done this, but anyone can put on a stone of fat. Anyone can pick up a pair of dumbbells, start doing some bicep curls and add some muscle to their biceps. When we talk about big middleweights, when we talk about big welterweights, we're not necessarily talking about the superficial size. We're not talking about the size of their gut. We're not talking about the size of their biceps. What we're actually referring to is the size of their frame. How tall are they? How broad are their shoulders? How long are their legs? How broad is their back? How long are their arms? You know, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about he's a big middleweight. You know, I'm not really too fussed whether a boxer has got perfectly rounded biceps or whether a boxer's got 12% body fat or 6% body fat. When I'm looking at size difference, for me, I'm looking at frame. And when I saw Kell versus Golovkin head to head, when Kell was in a big suit and Golovkin was just in a t-shirt, for me, Golovkin was clearly the bigger man. He clearly had the bigger, stronger frame. He had the middleweight's frame. You know, his shoulders just looked bigger. His frame, you know, I can't think of another way to say that other than his skeleton frame appeared to be that of a bigger man's than Kell. You know, Kell has always been a very, very big welterweight. But a welterweight nonetheless. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you stick him in a ring with Frankie Gavin or Paulie Malignaggi or Amir Khan, yeah, he's a big welterweight. But at the same time, I don't think he's as freakishly big as some guys are making out. If you look at Errol Spence, if you look at Keith Thurman, if you look at those sort of guys, if you stuck Kell Brook in a ring with those sort of guys, could you comfortably say that Kell Brook is a substantially bigger man at £147 than an Errol Spence and a Keith Thurman? Not as far as I'm concerned. You know, Brook is a big welterweight, but he's not some freak specimen. And if you consider Kell Brook against 154 fighters, you know, you get guys like Demetrius Andrade. These are guys who are big, rangy, 6 foot guys. These are guys whose frames are a different level to Kell Brook. So I think people are misunderstanding the size thing. I think people are getting obsessed with, is Kell Brook fat? Has Kell Brook got big biceps? Has Kell Brook got thick legs? I don't really think that's the most relevant factor when we're talking about size. What I'm more interested in is frame. That relates to things such as reach, range. You know, these are key factors for how the fight is going to play out in terms of styles and tactics as far as I'm concerned, especially when you're dealing with an outside boxer like Kell Brook. You know, the other day I saw on my Facebook, Tommy Langford had posted a photo of him with Kell Brook after sparring. And Tommy Langford is, you know, he's a decent sized middleweight. He's got a middleweight frame. You look at the two guys, Kell Brook, maybe Kell Brook has got the better biceps. Maybe Kell Brook has got the, the slightly better abdominal muscles. I don't know. I don't really care. But in terms of frame, it is clear as day that Tommy Langford is a substantially bigger man than Kell Brook. Check it out on Tommy Langford's Facebook if you want to see more. So I think that's the first myth that I want to address here, is that Kell Brook is this massive physical specimen. You know, Kell Brook is a big welterweight, but he's not a freak welterweight, not by any stretch. For me, he's not leagues above a Keith Thurman or an Errol Spence in terms of size, and he's actually a smaller guy than the likes of Demetrius Andrade and some of the other names at £154. Gennady Golovkin, he's a middleweight. He's been operating in the middleweight division for a long period of time, you know, his career. And for me, when they did the head-to-head, don't worry about the biceps. Don't worry about what the guys are wearing. For me, Golovkin's got the bigger frame. So myth number one is this suggestion that Kell Brook is this massive, massive guy. No, he's not. Kell Brook is a decent-sized welterweight who may well turn out to actually be quite a small, light middleweight. Myth number two. Kell will be much better at £160 than he's been at £147. Kell Brook has been wasting away to make the weight for so many years, and as a result it's had a negative impact on his performance. You know, when people come out with this suggestion, it's clear to me that they are not understanding the full picture of how boxing works. Yes, there is again some truth in the fact that Kell Brook's performances could potentially have been negatively affected by the fact that he's draining himself to make weight. But let me tell you why that's not a relevant thing. Because in Kell Brook's career, the fact that he's been the bigger man in the ring at welterweight has time and time again proved to his advantage. So whilst he may be slightly, potentially negatively affected to get down to 147, he is hugely positively affected by the fact he's fighting smaller guys like Frankie Gavin and Jojo Dan, who he towers over. When you've got a guy like Kell Brook whose style is to fight at distance behind a jab, that size difference is key. You know, that size difference is key because it means you can land your jab and the guy who's trying to jab back at you can't necessarily get in range to land theirs. So for me, this suggestion that Kell Brook is going to be a better fighter at 160 is really flawed because marginally he may be better at 160 if he's not cutting the weight, but he's not going to have the advantage he's had over the smaller opponents. So it's kind of a trade-off. Yes, he's not having to cut the weight, but the problem is he's going to be facing bigger guys. He's not going to be able to impose himself, and he's not going to enjoy the tactical advantage that his size difference has given him in the past. So I view that as a complete and utter irrelevance, and that's why it's gone down as myth number two. Let's keep it moving. Let's move on to number three, which is one of the more preposterous suggestions that we've heard time and time again, which is that, Gennady Golovkin's not really fought anyone. Kell Brook would beat all of Triple G's opponents. Who's Golovkin fought? Now let me say, first and foremost, I am not one of these people who say Gennady Golovkin has got a superb resume. I've actually been critical of Golovkin's resume and list of opponents in the past. I've even said it's too weak an opponent for me to consider him a top pound for pound fighter. You know, if you don't believe me, check my previous stuff. But the suggestion that Kell Brook would suddenly run through the list of names that Golovkin's fought is preposterous. The biggest fight of Kell Brook's career was Sean Porter, a fight that Kell Brook won in close fashion at £147. When he's fought at a higher weight, or when he's fought someone from a higher weight class in Carson Jones, let's be honest, he struggled. And he struggled to deal with the pressure and style that the bigger man was able to bring into the fight. So, you know, the only time Kell Brook's fought at the world class, he's just about got through by the skin of his teeth. And the only time he's fought a legitimate £154 fighter, he's also struggled. So where is that it coming from that all of a sudden Kell Brook would be able to absolutely dominate top 10 opposition in the £160 division? You know, a guy like Martin Murray, for example, he just went the distance with George Groves at 168. You know, if you're struggling with Sean Porter and Carson Jones, where on earth is the confidence coming that you can suddenly beat David Lemieux, that you can suddenly beat Martin Murray, Curtis Stevens, you know, those sort of guys? I'm not saying that I'd completely rule Kell Brook out of those fights, but this sort of, it's been taken as a given that, oh, this will be the biggest and hardest win of Golovkin's career. I don't think that's the case at all. A guy like David Lemieux was an established champion at middleweight, an established power puncher at middleweight. Sure, he had some flaws to his game, but there is no suggestion that Kell Brook, no logical suggestion that Kell Brook would have ran through David Lemieux. No logical suggestion whatsoever. In fact, to the contrary, when he stepped up to fight someone at a similar level in Sean Porter, he struggled, and that was at 2 weight classes below. So I find that to be a real ridiculous suggestion, and that's why it goes down as myth number 3 on the list. Let's move on to myth number 4, and this is one that is particularly being bandied about by the main promoters at present, specifically Eddie Hearn and Tom Loeffler. They're both saying something like, yeah, the weight is a negative, but you've got to factor in that Golovkin will be fighting away from home. You've got to factor in that Kell Brook will be fighting in front of his home crowd, and that's going to make a big difference. You know, absolutely farcical suggestion here. Triple G is a guy who has had 300 amateur fights. He is a guy who's fought in the Olympics. He is a guy who will have travelled extensively in the amateurs. The other thing to note is that Golovkin is from Kazakhstan. Now, I haven't got his resume in front of me. I don't know if at the start of his career he had a load of fights in Kazakhstan. But at least recently he's been fighting all over the place. I mean, he fought Martin Murray in Monaco. He fought David Lemieux in the States. Golovkin is not a guy used to fighting in front of the Kazakhstan crowd in Kazakhstan. You know, Golovkin is a guy whose entire career at the top level has been spent on the road, fighting in opponents' backyards, fighting away from home, fighting in front of crowds where he is not the home fighter. So this suggestion that Golovkin is somehow going to be negatively affected and it's going to be evening the play, that Golovkin is going to have a travel away from home, seems to me ridiculous, because if anything it's the status quo from Golovkin, and it would actually be abnormal if Golovkin was fighting in front of his home crowd. So, you know, that's just the promoters trying to build a fight. That's just the promoters trying to sell this as a more competitive fight than it is for me. That is one of the most blatant nonsenses in this list of 8 myths. So that's myth number 4. Myth number 5. Kell Brook has an iron chin. Why is that a myth? Because for the context of this fight, it's completely unproven. How many times has Kell Brook been punched on the chin by an elite power puncher at middleweight? None. How many times has Kell Brook been punched on the chin by an elite power puncher at 154 pounds? None. How many times has Kell Brook been hit on the chin by an elite power puncher at 147 pounds? None. Kell Brook has never been hit on the chin by an elite power puncher because he's never faced one. Now don't get me wrong, Kell Brook gives the impression of having a decent chin. Sean Porter isn't an elite power puncher by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not feather-fisted either. And Kell Brook stood up to his power well. He did. There have been other occasions where we've seen Kell Brook hurt, perhaps in the Senchenko fight, perhaps in the Carson Jones fight. Earlier on in his career, it's a little known fact that Kell Brook was actually dropped by a journeyman. So I'm not saying Kell Brook's got a poor chin, but what I'm saying is Kell Brook's chin is an unknown. Kell Brook's chin is untested. But there is absolutely no evidence that Kell Brook has a world-class chin against power punchers, and there is zero evidence that Kell Brook has even an above-average chin, above 147 pounds. You look at guys like Martin Murray, who's shown a great chin at 168 pounds in the super middleweight division against George Groves, and Golovkin was able to crack his chin. So this sort of suggestion that Kell Brook has got this great chin, for me it's a less proven chin than Martin Murray's, and it's a chin that's been hit by less harder hitting, lighter opponents. And whilst Kell Brook does appear to potentially have a good chin, and whilst Kell Brook may well go on to prove he's got an excellent chin, at this stage, taking it as read that Kell Brook's got an iron chin is a nonsense. It's an unproven chin. So that goes down. The amount of times I've heard, oh, Golovkin's got power, but Kell Brook's got an iron chin. You know, let's see how iron his chin is. I suspect that we will find out that it's no more iron than Martin Murray's when it comes to the Golovkin fight. Number 6, Kell Brook is a massive puncher. Again, and this is very similar to the point I've just raised about his chin. Kell Brook is a good puncher. Has he ever knocked out someone at 160? No, he's never fought anyone at 160. Has he ever knocked out someone on the verge of world level at 154? No, because he's never fought anyone. Has he ever knocked out a world-class opponent at 147 pounds? Probably not. The best opponent he's actually knocked out is the likes of Senchenko and Frankie Gavin. I mean, these are fringe competitors at best, let's be honest. The only time Kell Brook stepped up to world class when he fought Sean Porter, and Porter does have a good chin, but the only time Kell Brook stepped up to world class, his power didn't really look like he was getting close to stopping Porter or hurting Porter whatsoever. And if we pull up Kell Brook's KO ratio here, Brook's had 36 fights. He's won them all, and he's had 25 wins by KO. So he's actually got a 69% knockout ratio, which is good. I guess it's fair. It's above average, but it's nothing exceptional. And we've got to factor in that that is against welterweights, and that is, with the exception of the Sean Porter fight where he didn't knock out Porter, that is against welterweights sub-world level. He's now going up against Gennady Golovkin, a guy who apparently has never been dropped in his entire pro career, his entire amateur career, and his sparring. You know, whether you believe that or not is a different matter, but Golovkin appears to have a good chin at 160. There is no suggestion at all, there's no factual suggestion that Kell's power at 147, which, as I say, is decent, above average power, but for my money it's not the power we've seen from Errol Spence recently. There's no suggestion that that will translate to 160 against bigger men where Kell Brook doesn't have that same size advantage. So I think the suggestion that Kell is this monstrous puncher is a bit of a myth. I think that's hype. He's got a less than 70% knockout ratio. 11 men have gone the distance with him. The only time he stepped up to world level, he didn't knock his opponent out or hurt his opponent. And, being an above average puncher at 147 does not translate to being a elite puncher at 160. And you're going to need to be an elite puncher to take Golovkin out. So myth number 6 is this suggestion that Kell Brook is this huge puncher. Number 7, and this is one that's gaining momentum. Kell Brook is a better fighter technically. He might outbox Gennady Golovkin. For me, this is one of the most ridiculous suggestions of all. Kell Brook is quite an easy fighter to predict. He is very good at the long 1-2 from range. He fights on the outside, he's got a very good jab, everything comes off the jab. He's not the most versatile. Picture Kell Brook, if you like, as a 147-pound Vladimir Klitschko. He's not quite as robotic as Vladimir Klitschko. He's not quite as predictable as Vladimir Klitschko. But the similarities there. Kell doesn't really work to the body. Kell doesn't really have the biggest range of punches. Kell has very minimal inside game. Kell really is a jab, a right hand, and a grab. And that's what we saw in the Porter fight. He fought on his back foot, he picked the jab, he found his spots with the right hand. When Porter tried to bring the fight up close, Kell Brook went for the clinch. That's his technique. At no stage in Kell Brook's 36 professional fight have we seen evidence of a world-class inside game. At no stage have we seen evidence of a world-class range of punches, such as body punching. He's not the hardest guy to predict, Kell Brook. Don't get me wrong, he's a substantially above average boxer. But is he this superb, elite technician that people seem to be suggesting he is? I don't see it. In fact, I suggest Gennady Golovkin is actually a far more well-rounded individual than Kell Brook. I think Gennady Golovkin does more and has a fuller range of skills and attributes than I see evident in Kell Brook's game, if I'm being completely frank. So, for me, that style of jab and outside boxing is going to be very, very hard to implement against Golovkin. This is where Kell Brook, being the bigger man, has been so effective for him at 147 pounds, because he's essentially looking to jab and keep range against guys who are smaller than him on many occasions. Now, against Golovkin, you've got a guy who is a bigger guy with bigger range, and we've seen how Golovkin can establish his own jab. We saw what Golovkin did to Lemieux. He completely took Lemieux out of that fight with the jab. So if Kell Brook really wants to stand and jab with Golovkin and play the jabbing game from long range, I don't think he's technically as good. I don't think he's got the range of Golovkin. And yeah, this suggestion that Kell Brook is this elite world level technician who's going to technically expose Golovkin just seems bizarre to me as far as I'm concerned. Finally, number 8. Kell's definitely more of a test for Golovkin than Chris Eubank Jr. would have been. How many times have we heard this in the lead up to the fight? Now, I'm no Chris Eubank Jr. fanboy. Long-time viewers will know I've had my fair share of things to say about him over the course of my time on this channel. And I certainly would also be picking Golovkin to fight Eubank had they squared off. But for me, Eubank would have by far the better chance than Kell Brook against Golovkin for a few reasons. Number one, Eubank, admittedly at a lower level, has shown punch resistance at 160 pounds. Eubank has a good inside game. He's not going to allow the fight to play into Golovkin's hands by standing and jabbing at him from range. He's going to get in Golovkin's area codes. He's going to bring the fight inside the pocket and make it uncomfortable. Eubank's got a fantastic punch selection. Eubank's actually a bigger man with a bigger frame than Golovkin. So for me, Eubank would actually be a bigger test for Golovkin than Kell Brook would be. I think stylistically, Eubank is a tougher fight. I think Kell Brook would play to his strengths if he stands off Golovkin and jabs at him and uses his outside boxing. And I think Golovkin's got superior outside boxing. Whereas I think Eubank would try and negate that superior outside boxing by using his size advantage, getting on the inside and trying to rough Golovkin up. I also would be more confident about Eubank taking a punch because he is a naturally bigger man, and although Eubank hasn't been hit by a Golovkin style puncher, we've seen him take punches on the whiskers by the likes of Spike O'Sullivan and that sort of level of guy in the middleweight division. And at least Eubank's shown that he can live up to a haymaker at 160, which Kell Brook certainly hasn't done because he's been operating at a lower level. So for me, 8 myths that I wanted to tackle and discredit over the course of the video. Just to reiterate, let's go through the list again. Myth number 1, Kell Brook is this massive guy who is a freak welterweight and will be a massive middleweight. Nonsense. Myth 2, Kell Brook will be better at the weight. He'll be better at 160. I don't think he's going to cope not having the size advantage he's enjoyed for so long. Myth number 3, Kell Brook would beat Triple G's opponents. You know, why are we so confident he's going to beat Murray and Lemieux when he's scraped past Carson Jones and Sean Porter? The big occasion and the new venue and the home crowd are going to get to Gennady Golovkin. Yeah, right. Kell's got a world-class chin. Kell is a massive puncher. Kell may be better technically. Kell may be able to outbox Golovkin. Well, at least Kell's more of a test than Chris Eubank Jr. Let me know, which one of those 8 do you think is the most nonsensical? Leave your comments in the section below. Also, let me know your thoughts on any additional myths, any additional nonsense being spouted by the promoters or by some of the fans on either side. You know, this isn't a video just trying to attack Kell Brook. Fundamentally, I'm picking Golovkin here, but I'm no Golovkin fanboy either. You know, I think Golovkin is potentially beatable, just not by Kell Brook. You know, it's hard enough to pick a middleweight to beat him. I'm not picking a welterweight to beat him, let's put it that way. Let me know your thoughts, people. If you've enjoyed this video, do take the time to hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe so you can check out my pre-fight build up to this fight. We're going to be covering it extensively, so there'll be some good coverage I like to think coming up next week. Thanks for watching, everyone, anyway. I appreciate it. Have a good evening.